Hello everyone and welcome. Today we're going to look at another Emory Tate versus Nakamura chess game. This one was actually the first time they ever played one another. It was played in the Chicago Open in 1998. Now other people and other channels have said that Hikaru was 12 years old in this, but in 1998 he would have been actually 10 years old when this game occurred if the dates are correct. So in this game Nakamura was very young once again, playing with the white pieces, and Emory Tate was playing with black. So let's just get straight into it. Hikaru began with 1e4 and Emory Tate played c5. Nakamura now played c3. It was g6 and now f4 from white. So we got into a sort of Grand Prix attack position already if white starts with moves like bishop to c4. So this is quite aggressive. Tate played bishop to g7, but actually now white just played knight to f3. Developing both knights, with black playing the move a6, possibly preparing for an early b5 push followed by moves like b4. So it's all very standard, and here white decided to open up the position with d4, and black took, white recaptured, and now b5 was played. Hikaru continued with swift development. Bishop to e3 secures and helps the knights on d4, with black playing bishop to b7, already setting up a threat of bishop takes e4. So black's plan is to obviously push b4, the knight is supporting this pawn, and black will take the pawn on e4 if he manages to get b4 in. A lot of people, and myself included, have fallen for this trap, especially on blitz and online chess. It's quite an easy one to fall for. So this is why now Hikaru played a3 to stop the b4 advance. Black played knight to f6, threatening again the pawn on e4. Now there's two ways you can play it here. I think actually the strongest move is just to play e5 in this position. It's actually really strong. If the knight moves to knight to d5, for instance, white can capture. After bishop captures, white has this really nice move, knight to f5 all of a sudden. Discovered attack against the bishop. The knight attacks the bishop on g7. Black's forced to take this knight off, otherwise it takes the bishop with check, and white will move the knight back to h5 and destroy the pawn structure. So pawn takes f5 is pretty much mandatory. White can take the bishop, knight c6 to stop the rook being taken. And white's actually really comfortable after just castling queenside. For instance, e6, queen d2, and yeah, this battery here is going to be really tricky for black to defend because that pawn's really weak. The pawns are doubled on the f-file and black can't really castle due to this weakness on the d-file. So knight e4 after e5 is also an option in this variation. If this happens, white could have also gone in for just like queen f3, and the bishop is being eyed up by the queen. So the knight's attacked twice, forcing black to defend with d5, and then I guess white can just take, after takes, play queen f2, castles queenside, and queen c7, a very double-edged position, but actually slightly better for white. I guess white's plan might just be to launch a kingside pawn storm. So like I say, it's very double-edged though, because obviously white's castle queenside. So yes, maybe e5 here did look favourable. Instead Hikaru played bishop to d3 to defend the pawn this way. Tate played d6. There was castles. The knight develops to d7, maybe preparing an e5. For this reason, white played knight to b3, also possibly shoring up the c5 square and making sure this bishop isn't pinned by moves like queen to b6 perhaps. And Tate played rook to c8, with Hikaru playing h3, stopping the knight jumping in to g4 to harass this e3 bishop. Castles from black. Yeah, so king h2, I'm not actually sure why he played this. Maybe he wanted to play g4, or shoring up the king, but this move looks really passive and I don't think it's very strong. Because actually Tate now sacrificed his rook, played rook takes c3, an exchange sacrifice with pawn recapturing. And I think the follow-up now should just be knight takes e4. Because after bishop takes bishop to d4 to defend the c3 pawn. Black can just play e5. After takes again, takes, the bishop moves back to f2 with queen to c8. Black's now the exchange down but has good compensation for the pawn. This queen eyes up c3, White's got doubled c-pawns, and maybe a move like f5 from black in later will just be really good. I mean, this bishop on e4 is an absolute monster, isn't it? So maybe black was trying to be a bit too clever here, but he played queen to a8 instead. So a double battery along this diagonal, but I don't think it was necessary. I think it was probably overthinking that one. Because now Hikaru can get some counterplay. Plays a4, disrupting this queen side. Forces black to take on a4. Pawn takes a4 was played. Rook takes a4. And now black can win back a pawn with knight takes on e4. There was bishop takes, queen to e2. And now the computer gives this position as dead equal. So it is rather interesting. So obviously black's sacrificed an exchange and has some counterplay in the form of these doubled c-pawns. But all of a sudden, white's got some threats here. The threat to take on a6, and also threatening to move this bishop away on e3. I discovered attack against the bishop on e4. So black now defends his pawn with knight to b8. A very passive move. In fact, the best move in this position was probably just moving bishop to b7, eliminating both threats from white. After knight to b8, white played bishop to d4. Contesting the dark squares against the bishop on g7. Black really doesn't want to trade that off, so he played bishop to h6. And now Hikaru played the amazing move f5. So what's the point behind this move? Well, it's a bit of a sacrifice, but after bishop takes f5, for instance, you can just play queen takes e7. After knight to c6, to attack both the bishop and the queen. Queen to h4 is a really nice move. Basically now white has power over all the dark squares. You could play moves like queen f6, but obviously maybe the knight would take the bishop. Bishop g7, bishop takes, king takes, knight to d4, knight takes d4, the queen takes, the king goes back, you can take on d6. And this would have been a very nice variation had black taken on f5. So that's the reason why you can't really take it. So Tate played rook to e8 to defend his e7 pawn. I guess if that pawn falls, everything collapses. Hikaru now played another strange move. He played rook to a2. Again, not too sure what this move does. Maybe he's trying to protect his c2 pawn, but maybe I just thought like rook a1 would have made more sense if you're going to move the rook again. Because here now actually black can take on f5 with bishop takes because the pawn on e7 is protected. Perhaps black didn't do this because he was worried about rook takes f5 followed by pawn takes and queen h5. But actually after bishop to g7, black's fine in this position because there's no queen g5 here. It looks really good, but you can just play e5 as black, and black's doing a lot better here in this position. So rook a2 was a very weird move. Tate now played bishop to f8 though, and that's also a pretty unusual move. My guess is that this was a quick play game with a bit of a time scramble going on. It would probably make sense why two strong players are playing some unusual moves perhaps. But now Hikaru plays a strong move, queen g4, stops any bishop takes f5 ideas. The queen went to c6 for black, and Hikaru plays rook to f4, threatening the bishop on e4. The bishop has to retreat, goes back to d5, and now Hikaru does play rook to a1, threatening to bring his rook across onto the f-file. e5 now, so black's attacking the bishop and the rook. This basically forces white to play en passant, which is played. The bishop takes, which hits the queen. The queen is forced to move to g5 with the threat of queen to f6 coming, which will be devastating. Black has to stop this, so he covers the squares, covers f6. So Hikaru now played rook to h4. It looks like a weird move because there's no way to line the queen and rook up. However, the threat is actually rook takes h7, because if the king takes it, then you can move your queen to h4 with check, and there's a mate on h8. So sorry for all these arrows, but if you can see that, there will be eventually a mate on h8 using the bishop and the queen. So for this reason, Tate played knight to e5 to blunt the bishop. The rook goes back to f4, and Tate played bishop to c4. So black's holding on to their a pawn. White strikes out with knight to d2, attacks the bishop on c4, which is a very strong piece. And Tate played h6, hitting the queen and forcing it backwards, so Hikaru played it back to g3. And this game has been very equal up to this point, and now I think Tate makes a mistake. He plays d5. Yeah, a very weakening move, because now suddenly this knight is no longer protected by a pawn, and suddenly becomes a really big target. In fact, I think rook e1 is the best move here, targeting this knight. Sorry, targeting the knight with the bishop and the rook. You can defend with bishop to g7, but then comes takes, bishop takes, rook in fact, rook takes e5, and white wins with the tactics, rook takes c4. Discovered attack against the e-pawn. And even though I slagged off Hikaru's move of king to h2 earlier, it actually makes sense now because there's no intermezzos with rook e1, for instance. Well, I guess the queen covers that square anyway. But yeah, this is game over, because if pawn takes rook, then just queen takes rook would be a win for white. So d5, very weakening. Hikaru actually puts his king back to h1 now. I guess getting off the d6 diagonal if black puts the bishop there. Instead, black moves there, knight backwards, knight to d7, which makes a lot of sense. Hikaru takes though on c4 to get rid of that really powerful bishop. Pawn takes c4, and now queen to f3, offering a trade of queens. Tate declines, plays queen to e6, defending the f7 square, because now there's a double threat on f7. And it's quite easy for white to play now, because he just plays rook to f1, a triple battery against f7. This forces black to move their pawn, so he plays f5. And with all his pieces lined up on the f-file, it makes a lot of sense, this next move, just g4, very simple chess. If pawn takes g4, then the best move is actually queen takes g4 followed by a trade, with rook takes g4, hits the pawn on g6. You can't play king to h7 because there's rook f7 ideas, so if rook to e6 here, I think white can now start hoovering up the pawns with moves like bishop to a7, where you hit c4, and if there's moves like knight to e5, then you can just play rook to e4 and double up on the e-file. Should be a very easy win for white in the endgame. After g4, then instead of taking on g4, Tate played bishop to d6, attacks the rook on f4. And this was actually the last move in the game. I'm not sure if black resigned or lost on time, or it says on the web link there was more moves, but maybe people can't remember. But for whatever reason, actually white's winning this position all of a sudden. So bishop d6 was a major mistake, just due to g takes f5, which is a devastating blow. So you're hitting the queen, and you just cracked open black's position. So the point is, if you recapture with pawn takes f5, you've got queen g3 with check and mate coming. There's no way to stop queen to g7. Other moves I was looking at was maybe just queen to f7, but this still loses to f takes g6. You can't play queen takes, because then comes rook to g1, for instance. And if you try queen to e6 going backwards, then rook to f7 just looks really nice to me, with moves like rook to g7 coming in very quickly. So the final position was actually bishop to d6, and Tate resigned the game, with a 10-year-old Hikaru winning as white against a master. Very impressive stuff. And as you all know, he went on to do great things with his career. Anyway, I hope this analysis was joyful and useful. Please consider leaving a like, comment, or even subscribing to the channel, because there'll be more chess content soon, and I'll post some more educational videos when I can. Thank you very much for watching.